Sweat moves you forward. Degree Antiperspirant is here to make sure it never holds you back. Clocking in, sweat. Lunch meeting, sweat. Biking home, sweat. Degree Advanced is for the hustlers who put in the sweat. The world's #1 antiperspirant with up to 72-hour sweat and odor protection. Degree, here for sweat. Try it today.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
The Stone Zone. Entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Stone Zone. On Wednesday, the MAGA movement lost one of its most influential and admirable leaders, my friend, the happy warrior Charlie Kirk. Back when I was framed in the Russian collusion hoax, but many Republicans were cowering, Charlie Kirk was both a public and private advocate for a full and unconditional presidential pardon for me, proven to be right, of course, when Robert Mueller's final report was ultimately unsealed by the Department of Justice. It became very clear that I was guilty of no crime whatsoever, not Russian collusion, not WikiLeaks collaboration, no crime whatsoever. Charlie Kirk did more to convert young minds to the cause of free enterprise, capitalism, free speech, and yes, God, than anyone of his era. My friend, the conservative rapper, yes, there is such a thing, Tom MacDonald, had a terrific tribute today. Let's roll that.
Shot down and he was barely 31. Another woke coward took a life with a gun. He left behind a wife and a daughter and a son. All he did was try to speak for all of us. And I'm so tired of the hatred and the narratives. The patriots ain't dangerous, woke people are the terrorists. They shot and killed the father, sent a message to Americans. They ain't gonna stop until they bury us. Dear Charlie, I don't know if you can see us now, but if heaven has a window, I sure hope you're looking down. Cause we ain't going quiet, we gon' scream your name loud. And you're gone, but I swear to God that we gon' make you proud. We ain't backing off or giving up, I'll preach what you taught me. They may have killed a soldier, but that man had an army. This is far more deep than some political parties. And you can't kill freedom, so this one is for Charlie. This ain't the America that all our parents love, but good men try to keep making it great. Pray that God will take care of us, the system is failing us, when good men die for the things that they say. And I can't just be quiet, so I gotta be brave, cause this is America. Lately it's scaring us, but one good man can change it all in a day. Killed in cold blood for having a discussion, and liberals are celebrating murder like it's justice. You didn't kill a villain or the evil that it comes with. You killed a father and a husband. And I'm so tired of the left and all the wokery. We can't get along if you just kill us when we don't agree. Sniper rifle fire from a liberal that no one sees. Scared I might be next to die when I'm just buying groceries. Charlie, we'll make sure your children know that defending all our freedom is why you aren't coming home. I hope heaven has a window you can watch your children grow and hear your message echo from below. And we ain't backing off or giving up, I'll preach what you taught me. They may have killed a soldier, but that man had an army. This is far more deep than some political parties. And you can't kill freedom, so this one is for Charlie. This ain't the America that all our parents love, but good men try to keep making it great. Pray that God will take care of us, the system is failing us, when good men die for the things that they say. And I can't just be quiet, so I gotta be brave, cause this is America. Lately it's scaring us, but one good man can change it all in a day.
Really extraordinarily powerful tribute to Charlie Kirk by my friend Tom MacDonald. Charlie Kirk was assassinated in broad daylight during an open-air discussion at Utah Valley University yesterday. He regularly did these campus tours, going right into the belly of the beast to dispel myths and address concerns from students being aggressively indoctrinated by Marxist professors and organizers. Charlie Kirk was an exemplar of free speech, understanding that rights fade when they are not boldly exercised, And for that very reason, he's no longer with us today. He will be remembered among the greatest patriots this nation has ever known. I told the president late yesterday that I thought he should be awarded posthumously the Medal of Freedom. I'm hopeful that that will happen. The anger and disentrenchment being experienced by the conservatives in this country today is ubiquitous and aided by the cavalier and even celebratory response from some on the left. Some, like California Governor Gavin Newsom, have offered their perfunctory and completely disingenuous condolences, but many do not hide their true feelings of joy. They're actually ecstatic that Kirk is dead. They actually hope that others who share his ideology, like yours truly, will join him sooner rather than later. Those who refer to the individual or individuals who assassinated Kirk and cheer the behavior on as radical leftists are sorely misguided, in my opinion. To refer to them as radical implies that there's some kind of movement when that is not the case. This is exactly who they are. This is the core of the movement, the new normal among Democrats who've gotten high on their own supply. They bought their own propaganda about President Trump so thoroughly that they now believe that anyone to his right or to the right of Karl Marx is a threat who must be eliminated. When Democrats claim earnestly that President Trump and his supporters like me are Nazis, fascists, or white supremacists, they are implying that it is not only permissible but actually laudable to use violence to neutralize us. When they boast about making racists afraid or punching a Nazi, they do not mean the buffoon wearing the Ku Klux Klan robe or the morbidly obese Hitler enthusiast goose-stepping in the street. They're deadly serious about their intentions to impose their violence upon Christians, Jews, or anyone with traditional patriotic values, the sort who have been the overwhelming majority in America from its founding until recently. Their ideology is breaking down the social order of pillar to post, targeting religion, gender, the market, the rule of law, the nuclear family, and so on. The left has been wildly successful in their aims. Faith in God has waned considerably in recent years, with LGBT becoming the new national religion as toddlers are encouraged to exercise gender creativity. The family unit is decaying, with the rise of single-parent households subsidized by the government, with careerism presented as the highest of goals. Criminal scum like George Floyd, Luigi Mangione, and Michael Brown are made into false idols, while entire cities burn in effigy to honor them as the pagans once did. Until President Trump came down that golden escalator, the public was demoralized and conditioned foolhardily to accept that they would merely be the spectators and not the victims of the drama that was to come. As Russian White Army Commander Pyotr Wrangel eloquently wrote in his memoirs, Always Without Honor, President Trump's rise galvanized the forgotten men and women of America, dubbed the silent majority by my mentor, Richard Nixon, and gave them the means to fight back, not to take the rights away from women or minorities, or to go back to the 1950s as the crude caricature created by the left infers, but to allow the regular common people of this country to be able to live their lives free from this cavalcade of degeneracy that was so close to completely devouring us entirely. With Charlie Kirk's murder, we are forced to come to the stark realization that we'll never be able to turn the dial back. The comforting libertarian fantasy that we can live out our lives in a bubble, isolated from cultural factors, is a ruse. The ephemeral notion of America that we have loved and held dear is phantom. Now we are locked into a war for our very civilization, one that we cannot turn away and hide from. Charlie Kirk was not an extremist. He was always polite. He was never overly abrasive or offensive. He did not wish to impose his beliefs on others through coercion. Charlie believed earnestly and perhaps naively that conservatives would win the debate by argument, by honest discussion, by dialogue. But the left has set the terms of the battlefield, and the free exchange of ideas is not part of their agenda. The modern left thwarts any Islamic terrorist, Latin American drug cartel, or Chinese interloper as an existential threat to the tattered remains of our nation. Believing that since can be talked into the left will mean Americans inevitably suffer the same fate as the Bolshevik Russians, the Maoist China, or any of the worst communist despotisms that have inflicted misery and damnation upon the entire world. The rot, in my opinion, is just too deep, and to reverse our course with mere rhetoric, September 10th, 2025 was the day we crossed the Rubicon, lost our innocence, and realized that only one path remains to ensure humanity's survival. The time for American renewal is at hand, and the tree of liberty shall be germinate in warp speed with Charlie Kirk serving as a martyr for our glorious national rebound. I must tell you, as someone who has written a New York Times best-selling book on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, as someone who has just finished writing a book on the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan that will be published somewhere around Christmas of this year, as someone who has studied the thinly reported attempts to assassinate President Harry Truman, President Gerald Ford, and yes, an attempt on the life of Richard Nixon in Miami, as reported by FBI informant Gerald Hemmings, as someone who has looked very closely at the two assassination attempts against President Donald Trump. I examined the events of yesterday, and I see that Charlie Kirk was killed by a professional gunman. This was a professional hit, a skilled shooter, one shot. Two decoys were used. One man actually, older man, said over and over, I shot him, I shot him. This was to distract law enforcement while the real gunman got away. So I conclude that this was not some lone nut, as they said of Lee Harvey Oswald. This was not some trans shooter, in my opinion. This was a nation state, or perhaps, as we saw in the murder of John F. Kennedy, rogue elements of our own government, or someone who belonged to a terrorist organization. And still, there are curious things. We know, for example, and this can be proven online, that the LA Times and the New York Times both reported that Charlie Kirk had been shot on the 9th of September before he had actually been shot. Just that headline exists. You can use the Wayback Machine and find it yourself. We also see on Amazon on September 9th the release of a new book, The Shooting of Charlie Kirk, by Anastasia J. Casey. The FBI ought to be knocking on her door. The ATF report was leaked today by conservative podcaster Steven Crowder, but confirmed by the Wall Street Journal regarding Charlie Kirk's murder. Seems to indicate the assassin was motivated by transgender ideology, but I wonder if this is not just a head fake. The report describes how ATF officers arrived at the tragic scene, what they found in terms of actual evidence. The ATF report allegedly stated the location of the firearm appears to match the suspect's route of travel. The spent cartridge was still chambered in addition to 3 unspent rounds of the top-fed magazine. All cartridges have engraved wording on them expressing transgender and anti-fascist ideology. This should come as no surprise, considering the turn of the transgender movement has taken towards militancy, because conservatives want to stop children from being groomed, drugged, and mutilated by freaks and perverts. These monsters believe is their human right. The trans community has been responsible for several recent mass murders. This is what happens as society turns away from the Word of God. But I'm uncertain whether this is, in fact, the real source, and until we know what entity was behind this horrific crime, what entity is responsible for the murder of Charlie Kirk, they will not stop. Those who sought to silence Charlie, at the end of the day, they only made his voice louder. And now we must resoundingly defeat whoever is responsible for this, just as the Nazis were defeated in World War II or the Redcoats were defeated in the American Revolution. For our nation and our civilization to continue onward, we must get to the bottom of this heinous crime. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone, and I'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Political analyst Matthew Dowd has been fired from MSNBC after he made callous comments on air suggesting that Charlie Kirk got what he deserved when he was murdered by an assassin's bullet at the campus event in Utah yesterday. Dowd said he has been one of the most divisive, especially to younger figures in this, who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech or sort of aimed at certain groups. And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then leads to hateful actions. And I think that is the environment we are in. You can't stop with these sorts of awful thoughts. You have to then saying these awful words and not expect awful actions to take place. And that's the unfortunate environment we are in. Dowd has been made a sacrificial lamb for the left's extremism, but they're continuing to blame the victims for Kirk's assassination. Jen Psaki, former Biden press secretary turned MSNBC host, of course she is, blamed Donald Trump's rhetoric for the rising extremism, after Trump correctly said the left had repeatedly called Kirk a Nazi and a white supremacist in the lead up to his violent murder. Senator Elizabeth Warren inferred that President Trump's memes are responsible for this rise in violence. These awful people will never take responsibility for what they have created. Only a nationwide crackdown against leftist terrorism, the phony nonprofits and cell activity has to be put down with force. Only then can we solve these problems. Overshadowed in all of this was a Politico story in which the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, got into a public argument with the director of the Federal Housing and Finance Agency, Bill Pulte, threatening to punch him in the face. But yesterday, during the Council of Economic Advisors meeting, peace had broken out. Listen to this. The first voice you hear will be Secretary Scott Bessent.
Are there any questions or comments, or would anyone else like to weigh in?
Just want to say great work by everyone, Governor. Loved hearing your update as well. And I wanted to thank you, Secretary Bessent, and thank President Trump for your leadership. This has been quite a divergence from under the Biden administration. And it's really getting back to basics, getting back to systemic risk, getting back to the economy. So I want to thank everyone and your leadership and President Trump's leadership as well.
Good. So thank you, Director, for your important work in the housing market.
That is, of course, not what the Democrats wanted to hear. Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent, among the president's very best appointees, an outside-the-box thinker, a libertarian, strong supporter of crypto, an articulate critic of the Federal Reserve, working now in tandem with the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, Bill Pulte, who has exposed massive mortgage fraud by Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, Senator Adam Schiff, and yes, Dr. Lisa Cook, the Federal Reserve Board of Governors member. You're listening to Roger Stone right here on the Stone Zone, and we'll be right back.
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative
on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. A federal appeals court has ruled that Donald Trump's Environmental Protection Agency is allowed to legally rescind $16 billion in climate change-related grants that have been awarded through 2022 that were misnamed in the misappropriately titled Inflation Reduction Act. EPA Director Lee Zeldin, a good friend of mine who is doing an excellent job at EPA, cited problems with program integrity, the award process, programmatic fraud, waste, and abuse, and misaligned with the agency's new priorities when he announced the grant program would be cut back in March, which unsurprisingly initiated a legal battle. The Biden-era scam allowed $27 billion of our tax money for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which was a subsidiary mechanism for alternative energy companies in bed with the Democrats. Over $2 billion in grants went to a company that had only received $100 million in revenue the previous year, a completely frivolous and total waste of time. This scheme to enrich Democrat donors with taxpayer money can now totally be cut off thanks to this judicial decision. With $11 billion already spent, that will allow the Trump administration to rescind $16 billion of our tax dollars. While this may seem like a drop in the bucket in comparison to federal debt and deficit totals, These cuts will stop a green agenda that is quite literally strangling the national economy by design. Joining me yesterday in our tributes to Charlie Kirk, the founder of the Turning Point USA organization, who had ventured onto America's campuses to preach the gospel not only of Jesus Christ, but also of capitalism, free enterprise, and free speech, and to argue and debate with the Marxists, was my good friend, General Michael Flynn. He writes, Charlie Kirk will forever be in my family's thoughts and prayers. This brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk is a shameful act of violence that must be condemned in the strongest possible terms. This is not merely an assault on one individual, it is an attack on the principles of free speech, open debate, and civil discourse. They're supposed to define our country, our nation, the United States of America. Regardless of our political differences, the use of violence to silence or intimidate anyone is utterly unacceptable, and it should not and will not be tolerated. What we are witnessing in our country is a dangerous and disturbing trend. This rise in political hatred and an alarming willingness to resort to aggression when faced with opposing views cannot be tolerated. This brutal, horrific assassination is a stark reminder of the growing intolerance and the division tearing at the fabric of our society. It is these ideas, when met with violence instead of reasoned argument, cause all of us to lose. Our entire nation loses. We cannot allow this to become the new normal. This will not stand in a civil society. Instead, we must stand firm in defending our freedoms, our right to disagree, and our shared commitment to peace and respect for each other. The attacks on free speech and individual safety must stop now. Pray for Charlie Kirk and his family, an eagle of a man, a father, our nation's son. He was taken us today, that was yesterday, all too young. May God bless him and his family. I completely subscribe to my good friend General Michael Flynn's words, so I wanted to read them to you. But I also point out the observation of my good friend Liz Crokin, who was on this show only days ago, probably the leading investigative journalist in the country when it comes to child sex trafficking. She writes, I think correctly, Charlie Kirk was assassinated by a skilled sniper in a sophisticated operation. Charlie was murdered at a secure event in broad daylight where he was surrounded by security. There is no way this was not a professional hit executed by a team. The question, yet again, is what entity was behind this? Don't let them fool you into believing this was a lone wolf like they tried to do with the Las Vegas shooter. And I would add to that, as they still try to do in the case of President John F. Kennedy. The search for answers here is just going to continue. I have never been more affected by individuals. I've literally buried in text messages and emails from people who knew that Charlie Kirk was my friend, who knew that I spoke at all of his conferences, that knew that Charlie had taken up my cause when they tried to destroy me and my family. And what has now been proven by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, to be a total and complete fraud. The public outpouring is heartwarming in a way, but again, I think the president put this best when he said, in essence, those who sought to silence Charlie Kirk only made his voice louder. He will now go down in history as a historic figure, but he becomes a martyr for our movement, and I must tell you, we will not be silenced. I don't talk on this program or on my website about the many ongoing death threats to not just me, not just my children, but also my grandchildren, but largely because I don't want to engender copycats. I have, generally speaking, ignored those threats, but I will ignore them no longer. And I will report them to the appropriate state and federal authorities. Even today, on social media, there are people reveling in the brutal murder of Charlie Kirk. There are, and you can see this online, those who said prior to his murder that something big would happen at the University of Utah on the day that Charlie Kirk was murdered. I pray that the FBI is knocking on those doors. In a very classy display, the New York Yankees held a moment of silence for Charlie Kirk, before yesterday's team game. It's Yankee Stadium yesterday. At the stadium, the team announced, before tonight's game, we held a moment of silence in memoriam of Charlie Kirk. Kirk founded the youth activist group Turning Point USA, had become a fixture on college campuses. Charlie Kirk, a husband and father of two, was only 31 years old. The New York Yankees deserve credit for honoring Charlie Kirk's memory. This is also shows exactly how effective he was at spreading a strong message of personal freedom, religious belief in God, and the basic tenets of his conservatism. Charlie Kirk forged the way into the mainstream while being an unabashed Christian and being a pro-Trump MAGA patriot. No easy task in this day and age, particularly someone of his age. And ultimately, that is why he was targeted, because he was so respected and because he was so effective. He'll never be forgotten, and he'll always be honored as one of the bravest and most heroic patriots of our age. I cannot say enough today about Charlie Kirk and his enormous courage, his effervescent energy, his commitment to the cause. He didn't quit after the most successful election of the history of our country, the greatest single political comeback, but the political arm of his organization, Turning Point USA, played a very, very substantial role in President Trump's comeback, raising and pouring crucial dollars into the swing states, money that I can tell you firsthand was spent extraordinarily effectively in actual old-fashioned voter contact, shoe leather politics, knocking on doors, finding voters, turning them out. Not television commercials, not radio commercials, not expensive cable commercials, but good old-fashioned door-to-door shoe leather campaigning, the kind that most people don't want to do anymore. Charlie Kirk excelled at this. He was fearless. He was relentless, and I miss him already. I apologize to the listeners of the Stone Zone for losing my composure on yesterday's show as we learned during our broadcast that Charlie Kirk had passed. We honor him today, and we honor him every day by continuing to speak out. See, the whole idea here is to make us cower, to make us be afraid, to be scared, to be silenced. And we will not do that. We refuse to do that. No, I'm not going to take any foolhardy chances. I'm getting my Kevlar vest, which I had stopped wearing, but which I had to wear for 2 years when I went out in public. I'm getting it out of storage. My own family, my own grandchildren have expressed grave concerns about my own safety because I am controversial. But on the other hand, as I said, I revel in their hatred because if I was not effective, they would not hate me. Meanwhile, the Chinese compromised FBI agent, Charles McGonigal, who was exposed for leaking sensitive information to various entities linked to China, has been revealed now as participating in many important investigations in recent years. McGonigal was involved in a hunt for Chinese moles. How ironic, he turns out to be a Russian spy himself. He was involved in the Crossfire Hurricane, Russian collusion hoax, and the fraudulent Russiagate investigation. He was involved in Chelsea Manning's leaks to WikiLeaks, the Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks, and the failed prosecution of executives from the Chinese communist-affiliated tech giant Huawei, as well as giving a briefing to protect then-presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. McGonigal worked as a section chief of the Cyber Counterintelligence Coordination Section FBI headquarters for most of 2016, before being promoted by disgraced former FBI Director James Comey to be a special agent in charge of the FBI's Counterintelligence Division at their New York field office in late 2016. This is just another touchstone in how the deep state operates. This veteran officer was corrupt, and he was selling our nation out while posturing as a sacrosanct and above reproach law enforcement official. It's time to bust up this facade and start throwing many of these deep state criminals in jail, and then shut these bureaucracies down for good. In the case of Charles McGonigal, he was ultimately charged, but he was charged with taking bribes. He should have been charged with treason. He should have been charged with espionage. I'm still hopeful that the FBI Director Kash Patel will re-examine this case, as will the Department of Justice, and that Charles McGonigal will be hit by superseding charges, charging him with the appropriate crimes of espionage and treason. Now we learn, following the assassination of Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk, my good friend Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna has announced federal legislation that will designate Antifa as a terrorist organization and impose capital punishment among Antifa's terrorists found guilty of crimes. Congresswoman Luna said, I have legislation that would currently ban Antifa and categorize Antifa as a terrorist organization. This is specifically a leftist, anti-American ideology that has been calling people like us Nazis, fascists, white supremacists, and everything else in between. They reject Christianity. They reject the concept of nationalism. They think if you want a family that you're too traditional and somehow anti-feminist. They oppress people. They use minorities for their own causes to fundraise, but it is an ideology of hate. The fact is, the feds have their own and have not designated Antifa as a terrorist organization. Shows you exactly how useless the deep state really is. They have allowed this cancer to metastasize throughout the country to the point where Republicans seem hopelessly divided. House Republicans need to unite behind Representative Luna's legislation and put every Democrat to the test as to where they stand with the domestic terrorists, or do they stand with we, the people. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom's Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has fired the British ambassador to the United States, Peter Mandelson, over his ties to deceased pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. Mandelson's relationship with Epstein has been known, but a recent email release showed how close the two men really were. Mandelson called Epstein his best pal, telling him, I think the world of you, and urged Epstein to fight for early release after he was found guilty of having sex with children. This was in 2005. The UK Foreign Office said, the emails show that the depth and extent of Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein is materially different than what had been known at the time of his appointment. It is clear that Epstein had his tentacles into foreign governments throughout the world, with much of the political business, academic, and Hollywood elite being smitten with this child sex fiend. The decadent, depraved cabal that is destroying Western civilization with their excesses clearly have no problem with pedophilia. It's time for this ruling elite to be overthrown and brought to immediate public justice for their crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump announced that Charlie Kirk's body will be accompanied back on Air Force Two with Vice President J.D. Vance, who went to Utah along with his wife, Usha, following Charlie Kirk's assassination. They took Air Force Two with Charlie Kirk's casket and his family members to bring his body home to Phoenix, where he will be buried. Vice President Vance released a touching statement on X, where he described his relationship with Kirk and spoke to the character of Charlie Kirk, the man. Vance wrote, Charlie Kirk was a true friend, the kind of guy you could say something to and know it would always stay with him. So much of the success we've had in this administration traces directly to Charlie's ability to organize and convene and rally people of good faith. That was Vice President Charlie Kirk. It goes on to say, Kirk will be remiss more than I can express. He'll be irreplaceable as an activist and human being. His legacy will be that millions of conservatives were galvanized to the true nature of the existential threat we're embroiled in with the American left. I'm Roger Stone. You're listening to The Stone Zone, and we'll be
The Stone Zone, entertaining and informative.
On the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back into the Stone Zone. Will Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Too Late Powell allow an illegitimate Fed meeting in the middle of next week? You see, there is a controversy over Federal Reserve Board Governor Lisa Cook, who falsely claimed on two different mortgage applications that two different homes were her principal primary legal residence. That allowed her to get a lower mortgage rate, a lower insurance rate, and it allowed her significant tax breaks in two different states. But wait, there's more. Dr. Cook exploited regulatory lapses at a freewheeling D.C. credit union where they ignored the risks and gave her approval for 2 low-interest rate mortgages. Cook could not merely have tricked the underwriting systems at 2 major banks, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but was approved first for 2 mortgages by the bank fund staff of the Federal Credit Union, where she was somehow admitted, even though she was not a member and had no known affinity to meet the eligibility to be a member of that union. Cook made false statements in her 2 mortgage applications that the credit union overlooked and closed the 2 mortgages as primary residences, both in Atlanta, Georgia, and in Cambridge, Massachusetts, as well as a 3rd location in Ann Arbor, Michigan, when instead the loans should have been properly disclosed as riskier, requiring higher down payments at a minimum, a higher rate, and a higher interest rate. Cook has already had a primary residence and a first mortgage prior to these approvals by the credit union. What's particularly galling about this case is President Donald Trump fired Dr. Cook as a Federal Reserve Board member. He has the right to do that for cause. It's notable that 3 previous Federal Reserve Board governors resigned when they were just merely under investigation. Why should you care? Here's why. Because the Federal Reserve decides whether or not there's an interest rate cut on the American people. When you go to buy a car, when you go to buy a home, or when you go to take out a student loan, when you go out to take a loan for personal or business reasons, the interest rate is determined by the Federal Reserve. And the 2 measures the Federal Reserve is supposed to use in determining whether or not we cut interest rates are the rate of inflation and the rate of unemployment. But if you look at both of those today, both of those measures, they're either at the same level or lower than they were the last 4 times the Federal Reserve cut rates on the American people. Right now, we know that with Dr. Cook voting, as seems to be the case, the vote against cutting rates will be 5-4. Incredibly, the clerk of the D.C. courts referred the lawsuit filed by Dr. Cook against President Trump to resist his termination of her position to a judge, a federal judge, Gia Cobb, who is a member of the same black women's college sorority as Dr. Lisa Cook. That is a stunning conflict of interest which should void this federal decision that as of this moment, without an appeal to the D.C. Circuit Court, will allow Lisa Cook to vote against an interest rate on the American people in next Wednesday's meeting. Why the Department of Justice did not raise the issue of the stunning personal conflict of interest is a mystery to me, but this is how the D.C. swamp operates, and this is yet another stunning example of the corruption in the D.C. court system. Thanks for joining us today on the Stone Zone. Until tomorrow, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Stone Zone with Roger Stone. You can hear The Stone Zone with Roger Stone weeknights at 8 on 77 WABC. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode, so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?